Picture this. You have a team with incredibly limited delivery capacity. You're basically staring at 3 massive projects sitting on your desk, and you've got ticking clocks echoing in your ears.
Yeah, that's a familiar nightmare.
Right. Every single stakeholder is demanding their project be finished, like yesterday. So how do you decide what actually gets built first without the entire system just crashing down around you?
Well, the brutal truth is the math of your available resources, it rarely aligns with the demands of the business. I mean, you end up in a situation where attempting to satisfy everyone basically guarantees you deliver for absolutely no one.
Which is exactly where most portfolios fall apart. People just start building whatever, the loudest executive is yelling about, or whatever looks like it might have the highest ROI. But today, we are exploring a fundamentally better way to handle this.
A much more realistic way.
Yeah. We are digging into a case study by Dajana Morak. It's a deep dive on business process automation and portfolio management, and it centers around this automated office pantry supply ordering system.
Which, I mean, serves as a perfect Trojan horse for a much larger conversation about survival under extreme constraints. Because on the surface, ordering coffee beans sounds, well, trivial.
Super basic.
Right. But architecturally and operationally, it reveals pretty much every flaw in how organizations prioritize their work.
So we are going to look at the friction between project management and architecture today. I'll take the project manager perspective, so I'll focus on delivery, scope, deadlines, and, the brutal reality of just getting things across the finish line.
And I can take the lead architect's perspective, focusing on lean design, scale triggers, and governance.
Because that dynamic is where the real work happens.
Right, absolutely. You can't hit a 4-week delivery deadline if the underlying code is some bloated, over-engineered mess. The architecture has to support the PM's timeline.
But the PM's timeline has to actually respect the architectural element.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with how this portfolio is judged in the first place. Because in most PM circles, projects are scored purely by ROI. Whichever project saves or generates the most money goes straight to the top of the backlog.
Which seems logical on paper.
Yeah, it seems logical. But this case study argues for a completely different philosophy called constraints first. It essentially splits the decision process into 2 distinct layers. So constraints sequence the work, and scoring optimizes whatever capacity is left over.
Right, and adopting that requires abandoning the idea that value alone dictates priority. To actually execute this, the case study uses a 3-stage assessment.
So what's stage 1?
Stage 1 is the hard constraint check, and this is crucial. It has absolutely nothing to do with business value. You evaluate the backlog and ask, are there fixed deadlines? Are there critical dependencies? Or business continuity issues?
So if a project has a strict regulatory deadline next month, its ROI is totally irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. You cannot negotiate with a hard deadline. It either gets done or you face penalties.
The hard constraints bypass the scoring system entirely.
Exactly. They bypass it. They become mandatory commitments. Then you move to stage 2, which is the delivery readiness gate. And honestly, this is where most organizations just trip up completely.
Because they try to build things that aren't actually ready to be built.
Bingo. Before a project can be prioritized for development, you have to prove it's actually ready. Like, is the problem clearly defined? Do we have a named business owner?
Right. Is the MVP scope locked?
Yeah. And do we understand the underlying data? Or are we going to spend 3 weeks just randomly searching for API endpoints?
Which happens all the time. Okay, so if you pass those 2 gates, meaning you aren't a hard constraint, and you are fully ready to build, then you finally reach stage 3.
Yeah.
And this is where the scoring finally happens using a WSJF-inspired assessment.
Right, weighted shortest job first. It's a mechanism that forces you to divide the cost of delay by the relative job size. So you look at business value, time criticality, and risk reduction, and then you divide that total by the effort it actually takes to build.
Which fundamentally changes the math. I mean, a high-value project that takes 6 months to build can easily lose to a medium-value project that only takes 2 weeks.
Because you are optimizing for throughput, not just raw value.
It honestly reminds me of emergency room triage.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. ER triage operates on a very similar constraint-based logic.
Yeah, think about the mechanics of an ER. If you walk in with a sprained ankle, your readiness to be treated is high, and the effort to treat you is incredibly low.
Right. A doctor could wrap it up in 10 minutes.
Exactly. But if a patient arrives with a life-threatening trauma, they bypass the waiting room entirely. That trauma is a hard constraint. The ER doesn't stop and calculate the lifetime ROI of the trauma patient versus the ankle patient.
No, the critical constraint dictates the sequence of work.
What's fascinating here is the friction that happens when corporate environments just ignore that triage logic. They see a project with massive projected revenue and they just force it into the development sprint.
Even if the data model is a complete mystery and the business owner hasn't signed off on a single requirement.
Right. They put a patient on the operating table before they even diagnose the disease.
Yeah. The lesson for you listening is that a high-value initiative is never build-ready until the problem, the process, and the ownership are totally clear. And it definitely cannot jump the line ahead of a mandatory constraint.
So let's apply that triage to the actual projects in this case study. Because we have three initiatives fighting for the developer's time here. Project 1 is HR onboarding, Project 2 is pantry automation, and Project 3 is finance invoice automation.
Three big projects competing for a severely limited pool of developer hours.
Right. So looking at this through my PM lens, let's break down the metrics. HR onboarding has a strict 4-week deadline because of a new hiring cohort.
Okay.
It represents high business value, but its readiness is only medium. Like there are still some unclear process steps. Then we have pantry automation. 0 hard deadlines. The value is medium, but it is highly ready, and the relative effort to build it is, well, very low.
Super fast to build, yeah.
Yeah. Finally, we have finance invoice automation. 0 deadlines, but extremely high value. The catch is that its readiness is low, and the relative effort is completely unknown.
So applying the constraints first logic to route these projects makes the sequence pretty obvious. HR onboarding gets the deliver first priority purely because of that fixed 4-week deadline.
It's the trauma patient in our ER analogy.
Exactly. It goes first, regardless of the fact that its readiness is only medium. The deadline forces the action.
Yeah.
Then pantry automation becomes the fast follow MVP. It has no deadline, but the WSJF math heavily favors it because the relative effort is just so low.
See, my PM brain is screaming at the finance invoice project, though. I mean,
What?
wait, if finance invoice has massive business value, presumably saving the company serious money, why aren't we building it immediately? If we have limited capacity, shouldn't we focus on the highest possible return?
Because if you prioritize finance invoice based purely on ROI, you are essentially writing a blank check.
How so?
You have high value, sure, but unknown effort and low readiness. If you commit developers to that right now, they will spend weeks just figuring out how the legacy finance systems communicate.
Oh, I see. We'd just be burning sprint capacity on meetings and data mapping instead of actually writing code.
Precisely. That combination, high value plus unclear requirements, creates a discovery priority, not a build priority. So finance invoice is gated to discovery only. The development team will not write a single line of code for it.
So what do they actually do for it then?
The focus is entirely on mapping the current state architecture, evaluating the legacy silos, and defining the process owner. The only output for finance in this cycle is a build or no build recommendation for the next quarter.
Man, drawing that line requires intense discipline. Stakeholders absolutely hate hearing that their high-value project is in discovery. I mean, they want to see a prototype.
Of course they do. But if you give in, you infect the rest of your portfolio with scope creep, and you end up missing the hard deadlines.
Yeah, and the only way to hit that 4-week HR deadline is through ruthless scope discipline. The case study notes that the HR MVP shipped a core workflow, standard task assignments, and basic status transparency.
But they deliberately deferred all the complex role variants and country-specific journeys.
Which, from a delivery standpoint, deferring those country-specific journeys is a massive win. It means the developers can hard code a single logic path for the MVP rather than building like a dynamic routing engine that has to account for 50 different labor laws.
Yeah, that would take months.
Right. They even made the exception path manual. If a new hire doesn't fit the standard profile, the system just kicks it over to a human.
See, a developer's instinct is usually to automate everything, including all those weird edge cases.
It's tempting, yeah.
But automating a complex edge case often takes more time than automating the core 80% of the process.
Yeah.
To hit a constrained deadline, you just have to let the edge cases remain manual.
Yeah.
And they applied that exact same discipline to the pantry project.
Oh, what did they cut there?
They deferred multi-location rollouts, autonomous reordering, and supplier API integrations.
Wow, so they really stripped it down. They kept it to a basic Power Apps form and standard email routing. The PM in the case study literally states, scope discipline is how commitments remain credible.
That's a great quote.
Yeah. But once you have that locked scope, you have to actually schedule the work. So we have developer 1 and developer 2. You would assume developer 1 takes HR and developer 2 takes pantry, and they just code in parallel, right?
Well, that assumption is the classic trap of parallel development. Here's where it gets really interesting. The schedule actually relies on a specific mechanism at week 3.
The week 3 gate.
Yes. Developer 1 is fully dedicated to HR from day 1, but Developer 2, who is assigned to Pantry, commits absolutely no material development capacity to it for the first 2 weeks.
So they are essentially held in reserve. I mean, they can do some light prototyping, sure, maybe wireframing the user interface or drafting up the data models, but they aren't committing to hard sprint deliverables for the pantry.
Because Developer 2 is the insurance policy for the HR deadline. They wait for a go or no-go gate in week 3. The team evaluates the HR critical path.
And if HR is looking definitively green and stable,
Then Developer 2 is finally released to build the Pantry MVP. But if HR has hit a roadblock, maybe a system integration failed or something, Developer 2 pivots instantly to rescue the HR project. The Pantry build only begins when the HR path is completely clear.
that creates a lot of friction with standard reporting practices, though. In most organizations, a PM feels this immense pressure to show progress on all fronts simultaneously.
Oh yeah, the watermelon status.
Yeah.
Green on the outside, red on the inside.
Exactly. They would tell stakeholders, we are building both simultaneously. Everything is totally on track. And then when HR inevitably hits a snag in week 3, both projects derail because the capacity is entirely locked up.
That culture of optimistic reporting just destroys portfolios. The mantra in this case study is transparent status beats optimistic status.
I love that.
It is far better to openly delay the start of the Pantry project, explicitly citing the need to protect the fixed HR commitment, than to pretend you have the capacity to run both at maximum velocity.
And the success metrics reflect that transparency, too. The projects aren't judged by the same standards at all. HR is judged entirely on hitting the go-live date and the rate of unresolved exceptions. Like, did we meet the regulatory deadline, and how many manual reviews is it generating?
Because the constraints dictate the metrics. Pantry has no deadline, so it is judged purely on operational efficiency. So, request to order lead time and inventory accuracy.
And finance.
Finance is judged on whether the discovery phase produced a validated architectural map and a realistic effort estimate.
Okay, since we've secured the delivery schedule, let's look at the underlying architecture. We need the Pantry MVP to be a quick win, sure, but we cannot afford to create this mountain of technical debt that will require a massive refactoring project in 6 months.
Right, which brings us to the proportionate governance model, specifically focusing on the data layer. For the Pantry MVP, the architect actually chose to use SharePoint lists to track inventory items, requests, orders, and suppliers.
Okay, I have to push back on that. Isn't SharePoint a bit, well, basic? Like, that feels incredibly underpowered for an enterprise environment. If you are building a corporate application, why use a flat file system like SharePoint?
Because it's an MVP.
Still, why not spin up a robust relational database like Dataverse right out of the gate? You are going to need referential integrity and complex relational mapping eventually, so why not build it right the first time? It's like buying a massive semi-truck when all you need is a delivery bicycle.
That is the exact analogy, because building it right the first time is often just code for over-engineering an unproven concept. The instinct to immediately deploy Dataverse is exactly what solves out these quick wins.
You think it slows things down that much?
Oh, definitely. Think about the mechanical difference between the two. SharePoint is essentially a highly accessible Excel spreadsheet on a shared drive. It is flat, it's simple, and it's absolutely perfect for a single team just tracking basic inventory.
And Dataverse.
Dataverse is a central nervous system. It handles complex security roles, deep relational mapping, massive transaction volumes.
But if the system grows, won't SharePoint just break under the weight of that relational complexity?
Which is exactly why the architect employed a deliberate scale path. Dataverse is established as a conditional scale option. It is not an automatic next step. The triggers for migration are explicitly defined upfront.
So they don't just migrate because it sounds nice.
No, they will only incur the cost and complexity of Dataverse if the MVP proves the business case and hits the specific architectural limits.
Okay, so what kind of limits actually force that migration?
Granular security needs, for one. Say they expand this so that different departments have different budget approvers, and you certainly need to restrict data visibility based on Azure Active Directory roles. SharePoint list permissions become a total nightmare to manage at that scale.
Yeah, I've lived that nightmare.
Dataverse handles that natively. Another trigger would be if transaction volume spikes and you hit API limits on SharePoint, or if they roll the system out to multiple office locations, which would require complex relational data models connecting regional suppliers to local pantries.
But if none of those triggers are hit, it just stays on SharePoint, delivering value without all the overhead of a central nervous system. That's a calculated risk, but a really controlled one.
And that control extends to the experience layer as well. They implemented a co-pilot-style assistant for users to check inventory, but they placed a hard constraint on it. The AI is strictly read-only.
Read only. Okay,
Yeah.
so users can query the assistant to ask, like, how many bags of coffee are left, or check the status of a pending order, but they cannot tell the AI to actually place an order or modify the inventory count in any way.
Exactly. Giving an AI write access to your data layer during an MVP phase introduces an wildly unpredictable variable. Governance has to be proportionate to the risk.
Makes sense.
Because if a user asks a question in a weird way and the AI hallucinates a command to order 5,000 staplers,
Man.
right, and you don't have the referential integrity of a relational database to catch the anomaly, you have a massive problem on your hands.
So the ordering logic itself is heavily governed, completely decoupled from the AI, and reliant on rigid thresholds. I know they use two distinct triggers in the case study, the reorder point and the approval threshold.
Correct. The reorder point is simply a mechanical calculation of need. If the coffee bean inventory drops below 5 units, the system automatically recognizes a deficit and initiates a draft order. It removes the human element of constantly checking the supply closet.
But the approval threshold is what dictates the actual decision authority. So the system can draft the order all day long, but if the total cost exceeds a predefined budget limit, the automation just stops. It routes the draft to a human manager for actual financial approval.
Because the automation monitors the operational baseline, but the human retains the fiduciary control.
Yeah.
You aren't giving a script the authority to just spend company money unchecked. The architect in the text states, I define the governance model, ensure it is implemented, and make deviations transparent.
Which is how you build fast without building fragile. You isolate the risk, you let the simple technology handle the simple tasks, and you put really hard gates around the complex decisions.
When you look at the entirety of Morak's case study, the necessary alignment between project management and architecture just becomes so clear. I mean, the PM cannot enforce scope discipline if the architect insists on building a massive, complex data model for a simple MVP.
Yeah. And the architect cannot maintain system integrity if the PM just commits to a timeline without allowing for proper discovery and validation. So what does this all mean? The core philosophy really holds true regardless of which lens you are looking through today. To survive a constrained environment, you have to protect your fixed commitments above everything else.
Absolutely.
You must validate the uncertainty of high-value projects before you allocate your precious development capacity to them. And you have to deliver quick wins through lean, scalable design, defining the exact triggers for when you'll actually upgrade the infrastructure.
For you listening, a transparent portfolio board that exposes the reality of your constraints, your dependencies, and your architectural limits that will protect your organization far better than a dashboard full of falsely optimistic green status indicators.
Look at your own desk tomorrow morning. Seriously, look at your team's backlog. Are you actually sequencing work based on true, unmoving, hard constraints? Or are you getting distracted by those highly ready, low-effort projects that give the illusion of progress while your critical deadlines slip? It's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It really is. And when you finally do the right thing and label a complex, high ROI project as discovery only, does your business actually respect that boundary? Or do they quietly expect you to deliver a fully functional product at the end of the quarter anyway?
Holding that line, well, that is the true test of architectural and operational maturity.